Chapter 7. I spent much of the rest of that day fending off Miss Price, who wanted me to call my mother and persuade her to sign. I knew that would be a mistake. She did not respond well to bullies. I had to believe that she would make the right decision and that she simply needed the room to make it on her own. The next day, when she returned with a large duffel bag in the back of the dark sedan, I knew she had decided to let me go. Agent Jimez, carrying the bag, led her into a private room where I was waiting. He set down the bag and left. My mother hugged me. "This doesn't mean you have to go," she said when she released me. "It's your decision. What do you really want?" We sat in two armchairs across from each other. She leaned forward and took my hand. "I don't want to leave you alone," I told her. "But I do want to go." Because going off into space seems like a fun adventure, or because you want to accomplish whatever task they give you and take all our problems away? Do you want to go for yourself, or to search for a cure for me? Both, I told her, which was the truth. She let go of my hand and leaned back. "I don't want to spend a year alone," she said. "You're all I have, Zeke, and I'm scared. I don't want to watch my days and weeks and months vanish forever. But I also know that's selfish, which is why I decided to let you do this." I was relieved, and also a little hurt. Maybe I wanted it to be a harder decision for her. "Are you sure you can get by without me?" "No, I'm not sure. But this is the most amazing experience you could possibly have. And I would be a monster if I took that away from you. It's also your duty to your country and your planet, though I can't believe I just said that out loud. I won't be the selfish mother who holds onto her child despite the consequences to the world. The whole world, Zeke, is depending on you to do this, even if they don't know it, and I can't stand in your way." I nodded. "And there's another reason," she said. She wiped at her eyes with the tips of her fingers. "What's coming for me is going to be bad. We both know it. But what keeps me awake at night is not how bad it will be for me, but what it will be like for you. You're too young to have to deal with taking care of me how I'm going to become." She paused to take a breath. "Maybe what you do on this space station will help me, and maybe it won't. But I can't ask you to watch me fall apart knowing you could have helped, could have at least tried to do something, but I wouldn't let you. If I do that, you will come to hate me, and that seems worse than anything." I was feeling like I was on the verge of tears now. I knew she wouldn't mind if I cried, but I was a big boy space adventurer now, and crying seemed like a step backwards. "What are you going to tell people?" "They'll invent a cover story about boarding school, so you don't need to worry about that," she said, seeming to take some comfort in the discussion of organizational details. "Do you want to see what I packed? There might still be time if I forgot anything important." "I wish you hadn't had to go into my room," I said as I walked over to the duffel bag. "It's kind of a mess." "No kidding." I looked through the stuff quickly, and by all appearances, my mother had done a fine job. She had sent me off with mostly jeans and short-sleeve shirts, but also a few long-sleeve shirts, a sweater, and my favorite Justice League t-shirt. She hadn't packed my ultra-cool 10th Doctor coat, but she had thrown in my ultra-cool Firefly coat and matching Firefly suspenders. She'd also put one of my Martian Manhunter action figures in there. She knew I would want it. It was like taking my father's memory to the stars with me. "There's one more thing," she said, and then pressed a little cardboard box into my hand. Inside was a silver locket on a chain. I had never been much for jewelry, even less so for ladies' jewelry, but I decided if I waited patiently, I'd get an explanation. "No, you don't have to put it on," she laughed and shook her head. "I never thought I'd have to give this to you." "What is it?" I asked. "I've never seen you wear it, I don't think." "No," she said, But it's been in the family for a long time. When your great-great-grandfather went off to World War I, his mother gave it to him, with her picture and a lock of her hair. And then, when your great-grandfather went to fight in the Second World War, his mother gave it to him, with her own picture and her own lock of hair. When your granddad went to Vietnam, he got it, with your great-grandmother's picture and hair. They all came home safe, so maybe the locket is good luck. I opened it up. Inside was a little picture of my mom and a little clasp of her brown hair, with a single gray hair snaking through it. "I'm not going to war," I told her. "And thank God for that. But you are going far away. A little extra luck can't hurt." I nodded again. We stood, and I hugged her as tightly as I could. "Thanks, Mom," I said. She smiled. "For what?" "For letting me go," I said. "For being cool about it. For raising me to be the kind of kid who could be randomly selected by aliens to spend a year on a space station." She shook her head, and then she said what we had both been thinking. "Your father would be so insanely jealous of you." I laughed. "Yeah. He'd be proud, too, but also jealous. I'm just proud." "I haven't done anything yet." "You will. I know you will." And then she went over to the table where the release form had been left. She picked up the pen and signed with a trembling hand. I tried to think about what this trip might do for her, and not what it would do to her. After we said our last goodbyes, Agent Jimez drove me, Miss Price, and Dr. Roop across Camp David. Of the difficulties Dr. Roop had getting comfortable in the back of the car, the less said the better. We passed several checkpoints, but were waved through each one. The windows of the car were tinted, and the soldiers never once glanced at the car's interior. I guess they'd been told to see nothing. At last we drove into a hangar, and that was where I saw my first real spaceship. It was dull gray, with no markings, and sort of rectangular and boxy in the way of TV sci-fi shuttles. But it had two protruding engines towards the back and some truncated shuttle-type wings on the side, no doubt for in-atmosphere flight. The whole thing was about as large as a school bus, and, to be honest, about as sleek. I understood it was designed to be functional, not impressive. Simply a practical tool for getting from here to there. To me, it was unimaginably beautiful. Dr. Roop boarded up a ramp and through an opening of double doors as soon as we arrived, but Miss Price asked me to remain outside for a moment. She then proceeded to ignore me, sending out some last-minute emails from her phone while I stood there like an idiot moving my duffel bag from hand to hand for something to do. After about 3 tedious minutes, a black car pulled up and the president emerged. He walked over to me and shook my hand. "Zeke, I can't thank you enough for representing our nation and our world. I know you will do your very best for us." "Thank you, Mr. President," I said, suddenly feeling like I was headed off on a suicide mission. I reminded myself I was not. Hopefully. "This is one of the most important moments in the history of the planet and the country," the president said. "I wish you didn't have to make this journey in secret, but if you succeed, you will be a hero to billions." "I just don't want to blow it for everyone," I said, then winced at my words. It was probably not how you spoke to the president. He laughed. "That was how I felt my first day in office. Actually, it's how I feel every day in office. I think the people who worry about blowing it end up getting the job done. The ones who are sure they're the right person for the job end up making a mess of everything." "Thank you, sir," I said. "I've made my office available to your mother," he said. "If she needs anything while you're gone, we'll take care of it." I let out a sigh of relief. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate that." "It's the least we can do for you. She'll have the best care possible while you're away, and you'll be in good hands as well. Miss Price will do an excellent job." "Thank you, sir," she said. He shook both our hands again. "Good luck." Then he broke into a huge grin. "You are the luckiest people alive," he told us, and then walked back to his car. Miss Price impatiently jabbed a finger towards the shuttle. That was her special way of telling me it was time to get on an alien craft, depart my planet of birth, and leave everyone I knew and loved behind. Despite the shuttle's bus-like size, the interior portion was more like a minivan. I had to imagine that the bulk of it went to machinery and engines. Dr. Roop sat near the navigational controls, which were numerous. Switches and levers and screens and buttons. They were flashing readouts and rolling streams of data. I guessed I was co-pilot because Dr. Roop invited me to sit beside him. Miss Price sat 3 rows back, to better ignore us while she read through more papers. I presumed her phone was about to lose reception. There were no windows, glass possibly being a bad idea for a vehicle that traveled through the vacuum of space, but there were high-resolution video screens in the front and back and on the sides that acted as windows. I sat looking forward, and though I knew there was 10 feet of shuttle on the other side of the screen, it sure looked like I was peering through glass. "The other kids are on the ship already?" I asked.
"Yes," he said. "I took them up yesterday."
For some reason, I didn't like that they'd had a whole day on the spaceship without me, but I pushed the thought aside. "You do know how to drive this thing, right?" I asked Dr. Roop.
"For a simple trip like this, the navigational computer will handle the controls," he said.
"But what if something goes wrong? Shouldn't there be a pilot on board?"
"Things don't go wrong," he assured me. "But even if, however improbable, something were to happen, the shuttle can be controlled from the main ship, and, in an emergency, I am able to operate it."
I didn't love the idea of being flown around by a computer, but I knew I had to do things the Confederation way. You don't get to be a galaxy-spanning civilization without knowing what you're doing. Or so I told myself.
"It will take about 15 minutes to reach the ship," said Dr. Roop. "The navigational computer provides a very smooth ride."
Everything was happening so quickly, I'd hardly had time to think about it. Now, I was suddenly absolutely terrified. I was on a space shuttle of alien design, about to leave Earth and board a starship. This was nuts. I thought I might vomit, or pass out, or both.
"I have seen enough of human physiology to tell you are anxious," Dr. Roop said. "But I assure you there is no need for fear. You could not be safer. Now give me your hand."
I did. He took out one of the cylinders that Miss Price had used to inject me with the nanites. He then pressed it to the back of my hand. "Sedative?" I asked.
"Certainly not. These are more nanites."
"For what?" Suddenly my vision grew fuzzy, but only for a second. I blinked a few times and the blurring was gone, but things were now just a little different. Dr. Roop had a vague, transparent number floating over his head, a reddish 34. In the lower left of my own vision, I saw the number 1, and below that, 0000 over 1000. The numbers were translucent and easy enough to ignore, but when I made an effort to see them, they came into sharp focus. What's going on?" I asked. "I'm seeing numbers."
"That's your heads-up display," Dr. Roop said.
"You're joking. I had a HUD now?"
"I'm quite serious."
"Okay," I said, trying to figure the rest out. "What do the numbers mean? And why do you have one floating over your head? Miss Price doesn't."
"Miss Price is not wired into the Confederation system of personal growth and expansion. You and your fellow delegates are. You asked before how your species' compatibility with the Confederation would be evaluated. In our culture, we believe that learning, striving, expanding your abilities, curiosity, wisdom, all of these things have merit. From the formers, our great progenitors, we have inherited a system whereby an individual's achievements are recognized and so become the basis for further improvements. The nanites in your system have already quantified your attributes in numerous categories, and they are also capable of measuring how well your actions and accomplishments move you towards achieving certain kinds of goals valued across the Confederation. These successes, based on their complexity and difficulty, are represented as a numerical value. There are certain set values, and when they are reached, you are rewarded by having abilities of your choice augmented through nanotechnology."
I took a moment to process all of this. "So the zeros are my experience points," I said. The 1,000 is how many points I will need to level up?
Correct,
He said. And when I level up, I get skill points I can use?
correct again,
He said.
We have the technology to increase our abilities in ways that exceed our biological limitations, but in order to prevent this technology from being abused, those augments must be earned through accomplishments that benefit all of society.
I can't believe this, I shouted. It's like I'm living a video game. I'm going to level up? And so you're like a level 34 diplomat.
There is no class system, if that's what you are implying, but there are specialization tracks. When we get to the ship, you'll have time to inspect the skill tree, and you can decide how you want to proceed. It's an important choice because all augmentations are final.
How do I gain experience? And what kind of skills are we talking about exactly?
There will be numerous opportunities on the station to advance. You'll quickly learn how to pursue tasks that accumulate experience points, and that is how your delegation will be rated. At the end of your time with us, if your team has amassed a total of 80 levels, you will move on to Phase 1 integration into the Confederation.
So 20 levels apiece.
It doesn't matter how they're distributed, as long as the total is 80. Keep in mind, the more you advance, the harder it is to obtain each successive milestone. The first few levels can be achieved in days or even hours, but the number of required points increases with each level. It can take some beings a decade to move from level 30 to level 31.
Whatever fear I had felt vanished as I considered the prospect of leveling, of gaining nanotech augmented skills. Then the shuttle began to move, and the fear came back. There was a thrumming noise, and a series of vibrations, and then the sense of levitating. And then the feeling that we were going a zillion miles an hour, and that my stomach hadn't come along for the ride. Through the front view screen, I watched as we hurtled towards the sky. Then I turned around and understood just how quickly we were moving. We were pulling out of the hangar and heading upward, and then the Earth fell behind us like a pebble fired from a slingshot. Literally seconds after we began to ascend, we were in space. By which I mean outer space. I was now a spaceman, an astronaut. At the very least, a kid hitching a ride with aliens. I was not, however, floating. It really felt no different from being in an airplane. Artificial gravity? It sure seemed like it. And the stars. Imagine the clearest, most vivid night sky you have ever seen. The kind you can only find far away from city lights. Now imagine it 100 times more vivid, with 1,000 times more stars. Stars almost as thick as the black behind them. Stars of every color, from pinpricks to big glowing globs. Behind them hung the viscous soup of the Milky Way, bright and brilliant and real. Dr. Roop interrupted my awe to hand me a black, shiny, rectangular thing about 8 inches long and 5 inches wide. "What's this?"
Your data bracelet, he said. It wraps around the wrist of your non-dominant hand.
He tapped at his own bracelet, and a view screen hovered before us, showing an exterior image of our own shuttle's departure. He tapped at a few icons, and a keyboard appeared out of thin air, hovering just before him, in an ergonomically perfect position. It was translucent, made out of what appeared to be blue energy, but it was also real. I reached out and touched it, and it was solid. Not hard, but somehow physical. It responded to my touch, and I could feel a rubbery resistance with the tips of my fingers. Each stroke made a tapping sound like a real keyboard. He tapped a few more keys and sped up the image, slowed it down, stopped the frame. Then he tapped some keys, and another screen came up, listing a queue of messages. He sent that away and called up another menu, this one a series of documents.
This device links you to the wider sphere of Confederation knowledge and will enable you to communicate, conduct research, keep up with current events, access entertainments, whatever you wish.
He then tapped at an icon, and the keyboard and screen simply vanished.
You'll discover its many properties and uses over the next year.
He gently set the bracelet on my wrist, and the two ends banded together, tight and seamless, but in no way uncomfortable. He then walked me through the meaning of the most basic icons on it, showing me how to remove it, activate communications, search for data, and so on.
In the upper right-hand corner of your heads-up display, he said, you'll find a menu that includes a few tutorials. I suggest you run through the instructions for the data bracelet when you have some quiet time. Generally, we frown on direct cognitive data integration since we value the learning process, but we make an exception for the data bracelet since it's key to navigating Confederation culture.
I checked my HUD and found I could pull down menus just by looking at them, and then, when I wasn't using the HUD, it vanished. There were so many more questions I wanted to ask, but then the shuttle banked sharply, and when I looked at the view screen, I was filled with a sense of wonder. There before us, against the backdrop of black and stars, was an actual interstellar spaceship. It was really just the shuttle, on a larger scale. A huge rectangle, though rounded at the corners with a pair of massive engines affixed to each side, one at the end and another towards the middle. There were no windows, but the outer hull was made of dark metal, the same near black as the nanite injector. Only the lights affixed at various intervals and the yellow glow of the engines made it stand out against space. "Wow," I said. "That's it. That's our starship." I sounded like a total dork, but I was beyond caring. I was in space, looking at a starship that would take me light years from Earth. I wished my dad could see this.
"That is the Dependable,"
Dr. Roop said. "What a ridiculous name," I blurted out. "Zeke," Miss Price cautioned me from the back.
"He may speak if he wishes," Dr. Roop said. "However, I must admit I don't understand your grievances. Do you not think dependability a worthwhile trait?"
"Sure," I said, "for a washing machine, not a spaceship."
"Then what, in your opinion, is a good ship name?"
I was about to say Enterprise, but then I thought about it and realized that it was, in fact, a pretty boring name. You don't notice how boring it is because it's always been the name of the most awesome starship ever. So what else? The Normandy? That's just a place in France. The Millennium Falcon? It sounds cool, but what exactly does it mean? Do you really want to name your ship after a 1,000-year-old bird? I rooted around in my memory and dug something up from the larger Star Trek universe. Captain Sisko's ship. The Defiant, I said. That's a good name.
"I can understand that, under certain circumstances, defiance is an honorable trait, but under others, isn't it undesirable?"
"I guess."
"And isn't dependability always good?"
"Yeah, but that's not the point. What about..." And now I was just making things up. "The Victorious. Something like that."
"That suggests belligerence," Dr. Roop said. "It's better never to have to fight than to name your ships in anticipation of winning."
"Maybe it's a translation issue," I conceded. "It might sound better in your language." What I was really thinking about was Miss Price's little lecture outside the library. The Confederation was made up of largely non-aggressive species. Giving ships names that celebrated victories might sound horribly unpleasant to them. Maybe I should be glad it wasn't the Cud Chewer. I looked at the ship again as we approached. I saw doors opening on the side, a shuttle bay, encased by blue energy. My heart hammered and my stomach flipped. It was a beautiful ship, full of aliens who traveled across the stars, and I was about to go on board. "You know what?" I said. "I changed my mind. I think Dependable is a great name." It looked to me like the Confederation of United Planets took its new recruits seriously, because the captain of the Dependable was waiting in the shuttle bay to greet us, along with several members of her crew. They all wore black uniforms with maroon trim, each with a gas giant symbol on one sleeve. These 6 creatures who lined up to greet us represented a wide variety of forms, from one that looked like a giant stick insect to another that was sort of like an otter with a beak. One was almost human in appearance, but with bright orange skin and, this was even more surprising than the rest of it, weird cranial ridges along his head, like they have on science fiction shows that want to create aliens on a budget. Go figure. Captain Quelsel's appearance at first struck me as a little silly. She was about as tall as I was, but about half again as wide as a human of her height. She had yellowish-brown hide that looked pachyderm tough, and her hands were huge and meaty. Her eyes stuck out on protuberances almost as extreme as a hammerhead shark's. Then there was the short, elephant-like trunk that served not as a nose, but as a mouth. She raised it and spoke to me, and I saw that it contained a series of broad teeth, flat and short.
"Welcome aboard."
The translator made her voice sound slightly high, but confident, and also strangely soothing. I knew at once she was of middle years, confident, and probably generally cheerful. The number 43 hovering above her head told me she had been around for a while and done some impressive things. Though the captain might have looked like a cross between Admiral Akbar and Garindon, the informant in Mos Eisley who squeaks Luke's location to the Imperial forces, there was a seriousness to her that belied her strange appearance. Her eyes had a sadness in them, as though she had seen things in her travels she wished she could forget. Or, alternatively, she could have just been an alien with gigantic eyes. I had no way of knowing. "Thank you for having me on your ship," I said cautiously, not knowing if I should look at her trunk or her eyes or what. I ended up just looking away. She raised her trunk slightly.
"This is the 3rd time I've done the recruit run," she told me. "I know some members of the Confederation can look strange to those unfamiliar with galactic diversity. You don't have to pretend that it's easy or comfortable, and I promise you no one on my ship will be offended if you stare a couple of seconds too long. During this voyage you should take advantage of the opportunity to acclimate yourself to life within the Confederation. Besides, your appearance is rather odd in my view."
"Oh, everyone says that about me," I ventured. She laughed, or made a noise the translator told me was laughing. The captain then walked over to Dr. Roop and pressed her trunk to his cheek. She was kissing him.
"Cleve,"
she said softly.
"Always a treat."
He kissed her on the cheek in return.
"Yes, it is."
You'd think a giraffe guy flirting with a hammerhead and betrunked alien would be gross, but there was actually something very sweet about them. It was somehow comforting to know these two liked each other. Dr. Roop introduced the captain to Miss Price. He then offered to show our chaperone to her quarters.
"I'll show Mr. Reynolds to his,"
the captain said. I followed her somewhat slow and lumbering steps out to a bland metallic corridor lit by what looked shockingly like fluorescent lights. The spaces weren't as big and airy and bright as on the Enterprise, but they weren't as cramped and dim as in a submarine either. Everything was unadorned and functional, without being bleak.
"I presume Dr. Roop told you we are making a stop on the way to Confederation Central," the captain said. "We are picking up the members of the Granari delegation."
"He told me," I said, though the words came out sounding mechanical. My brain simply could not process everything.
"It's nice to have different groups of initiates on board," the captain was saying. "You get to know each other. I prefer when I can deliver all 4 species, but unfortunately the applying planets are too far apart this time."
"It must be a pain for you to chauffeur around a bunch of primitive species," I managed.
"Making contact with new species is exciting. The Granari, whom we'll be meeting in about 2 days, are an avian species, which is unusual in the Confederation. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to talk with them."
We now went through a door that led into a stairwell and went down 2 levels to emerge in a nearly identical hall. I decided I needed to stop flipping out. I was here, I had decided to go, and now I was going. I might as well enjoy it. "If the trip takes 2 days, would it be possible to get a tour of the ship en route?" I asked. She studied me with her hammerhead eyes.
"Are you interested in air or water ships on your own world?"
"Not really, but I am interested in spaceships."
"I would be delighted to show you around," she said. "Just promise that if I go into too much detail, you'll stop me."
"That won't be a problem," I said. "I'd love to see how things work, what your crew does, and how you travel through space. As much as you or your crew have time to show me." She jabbed in my direction with her trunk.
"You I'm going to like. I can see that already. After your breakfast tomorrow morning, come up to the bridge, and we'll start your tour there. We operate on Confederation Standard 26-hour days here, so meet me at about 0800. You can check the time on your data bracelet."
"I'll be there," I said, maybe a little too enthusiastically, but I decided I deserved an honest nerd out. I was going to see the real functioning bridge of an alien spaceship. She stopped in front of a door. Unlike on science fiction shows, this wasn't an electric door that opened with a satisfying and futuristic hiss. It had a grip handle and folded open like an airplane bathroom door.
"These are your quarters, room 421. The door has already been biometrically matched to you, so only you can gain access."
I opened the door and looked inside. It was small but serviceable, with a cot, a desk built into the wall, and a swivel chair bolted to the floor. On the wall above the desk sat a view screen, clearly not an actual porthole, which provided a view of the earth below.
"I've made sure you all have quarters with species-appropriate latrines," she said, gesturing to a small door in the corner.
"That's the way I like it."
"Across the hall," the captain said, "is a common room. We like to provide a space where each species can bond, though, of course, you can also invite the Granari to join you once they are on board. Additionally, you may socialize with any of the crew who are off-duty. Your data bracelet is automatically linked to the ship's communication network, so it can provide you with a map or directions if you get lost. It is not possible to gain access to any sections that are off-limits, so feel free to explore."
"That sounds great," I said. I looked at her weird alien features and felt a strange affection for this creature who did not know me at all, and who was making such a concerted effort to make me feel comfortable. "You clearly like your job," I said. She snorted.
"Captaining an interstellar ship is about the best thing I could imagine doing with my life, but some tasks are better than others."
She patted me on the shoulder.
"This is one of the good ones. Now, I must return to the bridge. There's a visitor's mess at the end of the hall that will accommodate your species, and you'll find meal times via your data bracelet."
"Got it. Thanks." I was secretly hoping she would invite me to dinner, but instead she clumsily shook my hand, perhaps having read about the custom, and left me in my room. I set down my bag and sat on the bed for a moment. Then I began to go through the tutorial for the data bracelet, which I figured I'd need to understand to survive. I opened up the HUD, found the tutorial, and started it. There was no voice, and no instructions. A kind of understanding washed over me. It was like getting Kung Fu uploaded into your head in the Matrix. I didn't know how to use the data bracelet, and then I did. I was so overwhelmed by it all, I didn't really feel social. I wanted to lie on my bed and stare at the ceiling, or look at the earth through my fake porthole. On the other hand, I didn't want to seem unfriendly. My fellow humans were across the hall, and getting to know them seemed like the smart move. They had already been hanging out together for days, and that made me a little uneasy. Moving around like I did always made me the odd man out at school, and I didn't want that to happen again. I told myself I was worrying about nothing. The four of us were arriving from different places, and we were all pretty much equal. I was going to be one of them, the human team, starting on the exact same footing they were. I walked across the hall to the common room, which consisted of thin metal tables and a series of metal chairs bolted to the floor. The three of them were sitting at a table, and they all had their data bracelets off their wrists, spread out. Charles had summoned a keyboard and was typing away furiously. Park was reading from a wall of projected text. Niana was examining a three-dimensional display of an alien board game involving different-sized cubes, and seemed to be puzzling out a strategy. The three of them looked up briefly, and then, as if on cue, they looked away as if I were nothing of any interest. I stood there for a moment, frozen, unsure how to act. There were some crazy-looking aliens walking around this ship, but there was no mistaking me for anything but what I was. There had to be some explanation, I thought. It couldn't be what it looked like, because if it was, it meant that they were giving me the cold shoulder. "Hey guys," I said. "Zeke Reynolds, of the planet Earth. I come in peace." Charles Dujanga's voice was unmistakably cool, a far cry from the enthusiastic kid he'd been back at Camp David.
"We recollect you, Zeke."
"Yeah," I said slowly. "Good to see you again too, Charles. Likewise, Niana, Park." The Asian girl glowered at me.
"I'm me son. Park is my family name. In Korea they come first. Not everything is like it is in the United States. You might want to keep that in mind, since we're going to an entirely different part of the galaxy." "If you do not mind,
Charles said, without looking up this time.
"We are rather busy."
There wasn't any misunderstanding them now. They were giving me the ultra-icy shoulder. I was standing there, holding my metaphorical lunch tray with no place to sit. What gives? I am part of Team Humanity, and we're all in this together, so I'm not sure why you're treating me like the turd in the punch bowl. Nyana scowled, finding the expression kind of gross. But I thought it was kind of gross too. We all agreed it was in bad taste. Wasn't that grounds for bonding? Apparently not. Charles stood up and faced me.
"It is not my wish to hurt your feelings, but you are indeed, as you so colourfully said, the turd in the punch bowl. You may not like it, but it is so."
"What are you talking about?" I asked. "I'm one of you."
"No, you are a random."
He gestured towards the hovering text display coming off his data bracelet.
"We have been doing research while you were delaying our departure. Historically, applicants that ostracize the random member of their group score much higher than those who attempt equal participation. In fact, if we exclude you from all group activities, our chances of success increase by almost 72%. You will no doubt gain some levels on your own, but we will gain many more if we don't have you to limit our potential. The data supports this, and certainly what we see before us right now only further cements the case."
At first, I didn't know what he meant. And then I saw it. Hovering above his head was a faint number. 5. He had already risen to level 5. Nyana and Misun were both level 4. I was level 1, with a total of 0 experience points. They'd had a full day to get the jump on me, but even so I felt humiliated, exposed, like in one of those dreams where you realize you're not wearing any pants. "Don't you think you ought to get to know me before you judge me?" I asked.
"No," Charles said. "We are following the numbers, and the numbers do not lie. We wish to make the best possible impression on these aliens, and that, I'm afraid, means we must keep our distance from you."
For the most part, my dad loved the movie Star Trek: First Contact. His only real gripe was with the end, when Zephram Cochrane operates the warp drive and attracts the attention of the Vulcan explorers. The aliens land and humanity has its first encounter with a starfaring species, an experience that will change the future of the human race and, indeed, the galaxy. Besides the fact that it is impossible to see James Cromwell's Cochrane as the same character who appeared in the original series episode Metamorphosis, my dad always hated how Cochrane conducted himself with the visiting and somewhat judgy aliens. He's meeting beings from another world, acting as an ambassador for humanity, hopefully beginning an exchange of technology and ideas and culture. And what does he do? He gets drunk and dances around to some, let's be honest here, second-rate rockabilly. Roy Orbison? Give me a break. "If you ever meet aliens," my dad said, "I hope you'll represent us a little better than that." Now here I was, meeting aliens, but I wasn't the problem. My fellow humans were. "How do you think this is going to make us look?" I asked. "Do you think the Confederation wants selfish grinders, or people who know how to cooperate?"
"The beings who followed this system succeeded in the past," Misun said. "Clearly it didn't hurt their chances. It won't hurt ours."
"That's unfair!" Once again, I was the outsider, late to the party, on the fringes. I hadn't asked to join the human delegation, but I'd been selected, and I should be part of the group.
"It is not about fairness," Charles said, his voice icy. "You are American. If we fail, you go back to your life of luxury and ease. You know nothing of the poverty and want in my country. Going to school for me is like winning the lottery for you. Every day in Uganda, people die from illnesses easily treated in the United States. People starve. People are killed in pointless wars. Children are pressed into battle. You cannot understand the prospect of plenty and justice, what it means to us. And I'm not about to risk all of that so your feelings aren't hurt."
"You don't know anything about me," I said. "You don't know what I'm fighting for."
"Your mother. Yes, Mrs. Price told us," Charles said. I know you want to gain the levels for her. I understand that. If you want the cure for her, then stay out of our way and let us succeed. You will only drag us down.
I stood there, silent, not knowing what to say, feeling like I would be admitting defeat if I walked away, but not knowing what else I could do. Niana looked up from her projected board game.
For example, you're keeping us from our work right now. We're trying to hit level 8 before we arrive at Confederation Central. That is considered the hallmark of excellence.
She looked down, and I stood there, realizing that none of them were going to make eye contact with me again. And so, humiliated, I walked out and into my own room, where I curled up into a ball and tried really hard not to give in to despair and homesickness.